things that are important for our growers to stay in business. We also need to have, good consumer traits, so things that drive our consumption of strawberries, and obviously disease resistances and a whole bunch of other things. The varieties we produce also have to meet future and changing demands. So we're always looking to the future, looking at what upcoming production systems, upcoming diseases that might come into the country, looking at climate change, looking at consumer trends, and seeing what do we need to be breeding now to be able to satisfy the needs of tomorrow. And so we're always looking forward for that. And lastly, we are the Australian Strawberry Breeding Program, so we are national. We have been breeding for the subtropical region for many, many years now, so this is where most of our historic footprint has been. In 2015, we started breeding for temperate and Mediterranean regions as well. So in those areas, we've been making good progress, but it's still fairly early days. So a snapshot of our varieties. This plot up here shows our variety uptake over the last 13 years. So in the red, this is the percentage of national plant sales, is the scale. And in the red, we have the proportion that are our varieties. In the grey, we have imported international varieties. So you can see there's been a really fantastic steady increase in uptake of our material, which is really, really encouraging. Last financial year, our material was around 50% of all plant sales in Australia and around 90% in subtropical regions. And that material had an equivalent of around $220 million farm gate value and helped support around 5,400 jobs in production. So this is something we're really, really proud of. As for varieties and what's coming up, a lot of you are probably familiar with Red Rhapsody, which is our major subtropical variety. Last year we launched a new one, as you would have seen this morning in Brett's presentation, called Stella. We have it out on farms in quite good numbers this year. The feedback from growers has been really, really good with this. This radar chart here shows in yellow is the performance of Stella on each of the axes for those traits. In green is Red Rhapsody, which is obviously our subtropical industry standard. You can see that Stella has, really excelling in fruit size and yield, and also tastes a bit better than Red Rhapsody, which is always a plus because Red Rhapsody is fine, but it's not fantastic. For our temperate areas, we have not a new release yet, but we have an accession that Talangi has very kindly multiplied up for us for larger scale on-farm trialling this season. So this 2017 025130, that will, if it's released, that will not be its name. But yeah, basically we've been trialling it for many years. It's been getting really good feedback from the growers at field days and things like that. Its data's looking fantastic. This green line in this instance is Cabrillo, which is one of the biggest upcoming varieties grown in temperate areas, and it's a high yielding variety. So the fact that our yield is matching that is really, really good. Our point of difference is that we have much larger fruit size, and so that's something that I'll come back to the importance of that later. Next year, I've been told we will also you'll be able to access our new specialty varieties, our white and pink varieties. That's them there. They taste amazing. They are so good. And if you want to know more about these, talk to our commercialisation partner who have a stall here, Australasian Plant Genetics. They are the ones managing these. They will be able to tell you where you can get access to plants of those next year. But it's been a long journey to get these out to growers. We're almost there, so that's fantastic. Lastly, well, not lastly, in the middle, how do we do what we do? An overall overview, speed breeding version of what we do. So for our breeding program, there are 3 pillars that we work towards. So the first of these on the left is obviously increased consumer satisfaction, and there's a whole bunch of traits and data that we collect in that category. And so this is really very much about increasing demand, increasing repeat sales so that we not only have happy consumers, but also help stabilise punnet prices across the season, which, as you can tell, as you would know, when volumes go up and demand stays even, it's bad for punnet prices, so we're trying to make that a bit easier. Secondly, increased productivity. Having high yields and fewer losses due to sun, rain or disease resistance is obviously very, very important. And lastly, and this is probably one of the most critical pillars, is reduced cost of production. So, as you all know, strawberries is a very, very labour intensive crop. Anything that we can build into the genetics of these plants to make it quicker to pick and to pack these varieties is going to make a massive, massive difference to how much profit you make as growers. And from our economic modelling, the number one driver of this is let's go back, is average fruit weight. So this is the component that makes the most difference to how much money you make. It takes the same amount of time to pick a small berry as a big berry, but to fill a punnet, it takes many more picks if they're small. So this has been an area we've been focusing on very heavily. There we go. So a very whirlwind overview of our breeding pipeline. In our first year, we generate our diversity. We pick our parent plants that have the traits of interest, we cross-pollinate them and germinate up the seed. We then plant those seed out into our seedling or stage 1 trials. And in these trials, every plant is germinated from a seed, so every plant is genetically different. And across the country, we have around 40,000 seedlings that we produce and assess each year, so we cannot collect data on those. But what we do instead is we go through the field once every 3 to 4 weeks, and we mark those that are performing well for the most highly heritable traits, the traits that are less dependent on environment or year, things like that. At the end of that season, we will pick the top 1 to 2%. And they will go into our stage 2 early stage clonal trials. And so this is where we have multiplied up the plants, we've cloned them using strawberry runners, and this is where our real data collection begins. We harvest the fruit every week and we collect all of those traits you saw in the last slide. We collect data on those, analyse it. At the end of the season, we will then propagate them up to trial again in our stage 3 trials. And the same thing repeated. The main point of difference is once they hit this stage, we are doing disease resistant screening. So we're looking at how susceptible or resistant all our material is to 5 different diseases. And then lastly, at stage 4, we then also distribute the material to our farmers across the country for them to have a look at. And this is a really, really important stage. This is where we get on the ground information about how they're performing in different environments, different states, different production systems. And so we will do this for 3 years on farms in ever increasing numbers until we make a final commercialisation decision on whether to release maybe one variety from those tens of thousands of seedlings. So we do this every year across 3 different regions. The other thing to note is that in order to come up with our parent plants, traditionally we've had to rely entirely on stage 2 and stage 3 material because this is where we have our data. But in recent years, we have started doing what's called marker-assisted parental selection. And so this is where we use the genetic fingerprint of a plant to predict what its performance is going to be like across a whole suite of different traits. So we do this on our stage 1 selections. We have collected no data on these, but what it means is we're able to predict how they're likely to perform, pick the best of those, and incorporate them back into our crossing strategy so we're able to get the best material back into our pipeline sooner, which translates to better varieties sooner. So I want to talk now a bit about what's called genetic gain in our population. So this is basically like a report card for how our population is improving over time. So this is going to look a bit scary, but I'll break it down. So this is showing the genetic gain in yield in our subtropical populations, and I'll get to temperate in a minute. But basically, across the bottom, we have our cohorts. So this is the year all of these plants were first selected in 2016, and so on and so forth. So you can see the progression in the population for yield over time. And we've got a nice red line that shows the trend, average trend in that population for that trait. And also for reference, we have Red Rhapsody, which is obviously our standard variety, and also where Stellar is as a performance. So you can see that we've had some really good gains. The 2 different charts are actually, the first chart on the left is everything from stage 2 onwards. So it's a broad look at what our overall population is looking like. And it includes most of the plants in there are going to be stage 2, because this is most of what's in this population is going to be stage 2. The second one on the right-hand side just includes stage 3 plus. And so that gives you a better idea of how our selected population are performing, what our selection decisions are resulting in, and also where our projects, where our performance is going to end up, because most of our parents come out of this population. So to go back to our charts, on the left we have the entire population. And you can see this slope here is the angle of this line. That is our gain each year. So we're getting about 23 grams increased yield every year, which is about 1 fruit. Doesn't sound like a lot, but across our population, every plant is producing on average an extra fruit every year. It adds up. So this is fantastic. And then you can see similar for our advanced population. The other thing to note too is that Stella came from the 2017 cohort. So in its year, amongst its peers, it was a high performer. It's now around the middle of our pack. So this is just showing where our future varieties are going to end up. We're going to have, some very exciting things in the future. Similar, this is our gains in average fruit weight. For subtropical region, again, we've got nice gains. We've got about 3/4 of a gram per fruit increase every year across the board. And again, Red Rhapsody and Stella. Stella in 2017 was again, a high performer amongst its peers. Our average of our population is now higher than that. So our future varieties are looking very interesting. Heading to temperate now, to our southern states. This is our yield genetic gains. You can see that this line is not nearly as steep, but it is statistically significant. And the exciting thing is, so we've got this compared against Albion, which is a historic variety of choice, which is still very, very popular. Cabrillo is the up-and-coming variety. It's replacing Albion. And even though our varieties, we haven't seen as much gain. The good news is that Cabrillo is a very high yielding variety. So the fact that our material is highly competitive with what Cabrillo is producing is actually, we're in a really good position here. Also, this has not been where the most emphasis in our breeding has been. Instead, for temperate areas, it has been here, fruit weight. So historically and currently, average fruit weights in temperate regions have been much, much lower than in any other region in Australia. A lot of it is because it's production over summer when it's hot. Flower trusses branch, and you end up with much greater variability in average fruit size and much smaller average fruit size overall. For this reason, cost of production in our temperate areas per punnet is so much higher than in any other area in Australia. Really based almost exclusively on average fruit size. It costs so much more to produce a punnet because you're having to put so much extra labour cost in here. So this has been an area where we have seen that we can really make a difference in our breeding for temperate areas. You can see here where we're comparing with our current varieties, Cabrillo and Albion, and our latest cohort is almost entirely performing at larger fruit sizes than our standard varieties. This is really, really exciting stuff. We've made fantastic gains here, and this is something where we hope that we can really help improve the profitability of growing for our temperate producers. Lastly, I'm going to just talk a little bit about something that's called red leaf disorder, which particularly our subtropical and Mediterranean growers will know a lot about. So red leaf disorder was first seen in Australia in 2014, and before that in Brazil. And we don't know what it is. We've invested a lot of money in trying to work out what causes it, but basically it's characterised by interveinal reddening, and it can lead to fields that look like this. You can have reduced yield, reduced fruit size, and whole plant death. It's been a big problem, and so it's been a really huge impact on our subtropical and Mediterranean farmers. In good news though, even though we have not been able to figure out exactly what red leaf is, we've actually been able to breed for resistance to it. It turns out that resistance is highly heritable and controlled by very few genes. We've got some hot off the press data suggesting that literally 2 genes are accounting for more than, well, up to 92% of the variability in resistance for this. 1 gene for resistance, 1 gene for susceptibility. So we're doing a lot more in this space and hopefully be able to reverse engineer this. By knowing what those genes are, we can figure out what the disease actually is by looking at other crops. So all of our latest releases for subtropical Australia is completely resistant to red leaf disorder. So Stella that you saw before and Susie, the one before it. In the field, they look like this. So we've got a line down the middle. We've got this is what we used to look like. We have plants like this throughout our breeding program now that, despite being surrounded by red leaf, will never ever show a single symptom. And so this has been something where we've been able to make a huge impact for our subtropical and Mediterranean growers. So yes, none of this would be possible without our team. So this is our Australian strawberry breeding program team here. So yes, thank you all very much for listening. And I think I'm even got a little couple minutes left. So yes, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah. Yes, so the question was about what our IP protection strategy is and our commercialisation process. So we are a public breeding program, so all of our varieties are available to any Australian grower. We protect all our varieties under PBR, plant breeders' rights, but they are made freely distributed, made freely available to any propagator who wants to grow and sell material of those. The commercialisation aspect of our varieties is handled by Australasian Plant Genetics, who won that via a tender process. And so they're the ones who have the stand here, and they are the ones that sort of manage the distribution of the material to producers and sort of monitor things there. Any other questions? Fantastic. Thank you very much.